All right, so we'll go ahead and get started. Just want to say morning or good afternoon to all of our viewers and those who are joining us. My name is Tiffany Rather, and I'm here with the team at MindSite News. Today, our own Rob Waters is in conversation with David Bronner, the CEO of Dr. Bronner's Magic Soaps. This is the second in a series of live talks with people involved in the effort to create new mental health therapies based around psychedelics. We're doing these conversations to stimulate conversation and the exchange of ideas to introduce ourselves to a wider audience and to raise funds to enable MindSite News to better cover this emerging world of psychedelics research, policy, therapy, and commerce. At the top of our website, mindsitenews.org, you can sign up to subscribe to our newsletter to stay attuned to this field, as well as make a donation to our efforts to cover this field. We'll place the links for those in the Zoom chat a few times during the course of this conversation. And now let's get to the conversation with Rob Waters and David Bronner.
Thanks, Tiffany, and hello, David. It's great to have you join us. And let's get right to it. In less than 3 months, the psilocybin Services Act will go into effect in Oregon. With it, the state's health authority will essentially get into the psilocybin business and will start licensing manufacturers, suppliers, and sellers of psilocybin products and services. Your family's company, Dr. Bronner's Magic Soaps, was the primary financial backer for the measure that made this happen. I think you gave, $2 million to the effort, while also backing a companion measure passed on the same ballot in 2020 that reclassifies possession for personal use of small amounts of drugs, including even meth, cocaine, and heroin, as low-level violations punishable by a $100 fine. So these are huge social policy changes, and your company has been a driving force behind them. Why? Tell us about the history of your family and the company and why this is in keeping with that history.
Yeah. So my grandfather, Dr. Bronner, founded our organization as a company as a nonprofit religious organization. His mission and passion was to unite the human race across religious and ethnic divides. His parents, my grandparents, Bertold and Francisca, were murdered in the Holocaust, and our factory was Aryanized. And my granddad was himself a third-generation master soap maker, trained in the guild system of the time. My family had, 3 soap factories. And my great-great-grandfather first began manufacture in 1858 in the basement of his house, in a small house in Laupheim, another small German town. Which actually we recently purchased our ancestral home there, and we're raising the ceilings, and it's going to be a home for autistic adults, like a Catholic-run charity, and then also our headquarters for our European office, and kind of be a little museum and stuff of our family history there. But basically, the Holocaust and just the enormous tragedy, and was the dark inspiration of my granddad's beautiful mission to unify the human race, and that we're all children of the same divine source, and all the faith traditions and spiritual giants are saying the same thing, and that if we, when religions aren't making idols out of their beliefs and demonizing each other, they're all pointing at this. And so, his mantra was all one or none. We're all one or none, in a nuclear armed world. We don't have a choice. Fast forward, he stayed true to the natural, biodegradable Castile soaps of his family's lineage. He was a very early ecological pioneer as well, and kind of saw the disaster of moving to this kind of petrochemical, much more, just toxic and problematic economic basis that we're on, and stayed true to what was by then kind of out of fashion soaps, like all these kind of new petrochemical detergent-based products were becoming the rage. And, just the post-World War II era, like the, advent of synthetic fertility and fertilizers and pesticides and plastics, and, just everything that's contributing to this great extinction event that we're living through, and really need to, figure out how to simplify our lives and diets and lifestyles and impact on the earth. And so it wasn't until the 60s and the rise of the counterculture and a generation inspired, by books like Rachel Carlson's Silent Spring about, all the songbirds are gone because of overspray and pesticides and killing of all this non-target wildlife. And then, a war that wouldn't stop in this war machine. And so this generation that, just dropped out and wanted to figure out a more sustainable, harmonious lifestyle. And here's this, awesome soap. It's concentrated, it's versatile. You can wash your hair, dog dishes, the other side of the river, not worry about it. It has this awesome groovy message of peace. And so like our soap, like that, his soaps just went everywhere, Woodstock, it was just like very much a staple of the counterculture. And for him, all the profits he earned, he just plowed back into the mission, and the soap was there to sell the label, not vice versa. And the story of the label is that people were coming when he was going around the country lecturing to just get the soaps. Word got out that it was really good soap, and people were just kind of taking the soap and leaving without sticking around to hear what he had to say. So he that's when he started to put the message on the labels of the soap.
So those messages, in some ways, they're about love and oneness. These days, you have a blog and you do video announcements. Were those bottles of soap with the tiny, densely packed cosmic type? Was that sort of an early kind of social media?
Yeah, he's like kind of like Thomas Paine was a real hero of his. So the famous pamphleteer, revolutionary. And in some ways, I think, yeah, he feels like he's pamphleting, like just a kind of age-old political, medium and message. But yeah, the social media of the day, like pamphleting and we do, not only do we actually leverage our social media channels, we actually do leverage the bottles of our soap to, like, mostly it's a memorial to his vision, and it's just pretty much as he says it. But then periodically, for one cause or another, we'll change up the quart labels and really talk about, for example, psychedelic healing. So we had in 2020, we did the first half of the year, we had a Heal Earth message, and it was all about regenerative organic agriculture and how do we farm in nature's image, and get away from pesticides and synthetic fertilizers that are so destructive, and replicate a natural ecosystem that doesn't have a bunch of synthetic inputs. And so that was the first half. The second half was Heal Soul. So we had Heal Earth and then Heal Soul. And Heal Soul is all about psychedelic therapy and medicines and their promise for healing, and communicating in a way like my brother and company president Mike Bronner says, like my mom's church group can receive, keeping it tight in a therapeutic frame, and talking about the healing of trauma and depression and end of life anxiety. And we thought that was going to be super controversial, but it turned out that the culture's moved, and a real sign that the culture's moved, that because we sell into like Walgreens and Walmart, some pretty conservative stores, and we didn't get any pushback. But we just honor, my granddad's activism. He just saw the company as an engine to advance his, mission in life and vision. And yeah, we try to honor that. So he lost to the IRS. The IRS disagreed with his tax exempt religious status, and he was in bankruptcy in the late 80s. And my parents and my uncle Ralph stepped in and helped right the ship and exit as a for-profit. But we've got that nonprofit DNA. So we're like a social venture benefit corp, and where we cap our executive salaries at 5 times our lowest paid, fully vested position, and all profits we don't need for the company, we dedicate to the charitable and activist causes we believe in. And and there's a number of them, but ending the drug war and integrating psychedelic healing. And yeah, so to get to Oregon, I mean, I feel, like our main kind of passion focuses are regenerative organic agriculture. And by that, we mean bringing together the best of soil health, fair labor, and animal welfare into like a single farming system. So that one that's, treating, the land right, the workers, the people, farmers involved right, and any of the animals and livestock are being raised in a pasture-based system. And interesting, and then also ending the drug war and integrating our psychedelic medicines and allies as fast as possible. And it's interesting that Michael Pollan shares that exact twin passion. I actually met him over on his kind of food justice, agricultural activism
Sure.
before on the psychedelic side, but it's really cool. Yeah.
It's a logical progression in some ways. So you've mentioned in various places that your own family is no stranger to depression and anxiety. Tell us a little bit more about that and how that's motivated, this line of work now.
Yeah. Well, I'll just say, in my own personal experience, it was psychedelics and have been just crucial in helping me get in touch with my more authentic self and really understand the toxic masculinity that for a time I was really, not in a good relationship with, and get in touch with my inner feminine and celebrate that and just be my more authentic self and get in touch with spirit and soul and, just being set on my spiritual path and just the power that these medicines have to really do that and enable us to access states of consciousness and being that are just incredible and so healing. And then in, my brother and various friends, that suffer in a more kind of clinical way, more, have a more formal mental health diagnosis, seeing how helpful, psychedelics like ketamine and psilocybin and MDMA are for people suffering, acute depression or, treatment-resistant PTSD, and just being able to resolve these conditions and live such a better quality of life. And so yeah, and that ultimately all informs Oregon. So Oregon is kind of the blazing the path and example, and that's we had Measure 109, which was integrating psilocybin therapy and replicating kind of the look and feel of what's coming out of Johns Hopkins and NYU, kind of setting in motion a program that will license training programs that will in turn train facilitators who will be professionally licensed and trained and accountable. And then, we'll create that kind of therapeutic container that most Americans, especially psychedelically naive Americans, need to see and have to have that kind of well-regulated access point to avail themselves of psychedelic healing. And then at the same time, we decriminalized all drugs with Measure 110 in favor of a treatment, not jail. And people who are suffering substance use disorders, pretty much always about emotional pain and trauma, and arrest and incarceration is just making that trauma worse and is not helping that person at all with their situation and struggle. So we need to move out of this criminalization approach to substance use and substance abuse and move to a treatment approach. And of course, what's better than psilocybin or psychedelic assisted therapy, all the trials with smoking cessation, alcoholism. There's a cocaine trial underway showing how psilocybin is a really effective intervention and can really help people break those self-destructive patterns of thought and behavior. So we feel like, Oregon was really kind of blazing the path and example, and really excited.
So let's talk a little bit about that. The new law goes into effect on January 2nd. So how is this thing going to work? There are a lot of moving parts, a lot of regulations. How do you see them rolling out thus far?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of really good people working on it. And, of course, inevitably there's going to be bureaucratic whatevers, and, we're going to just need to navigate all that. But, by and large, I think it's coming together as envisioned, which is, there'll be licensed centers where licensed facilitators can provide a facilitated session for pretty much any adult who can safely benefit. So you don't need a formal diagnosis. And that's another crucial piece here, that, unlike the FDA approval route for psilocybin for, say, treatment-resistant depression, like you can only access the medicine with that condition. Otherwise, it'll be off-label and insanely expensive. And in Oregon, in the state regulated model, it's, more therapeutic frame. It's not in the medical pharma frame. So in the same way you would go to your therapist, you can go to psilocybin facilitator, and they'll work with you. You do an intake, screening protocol, make sure you don't have any contraindications like a schizophrenia or something that might be not a good idea to actually avail yourself of psilocybin. But assuming that you don't, then most people will be able to access and have a powerful experience. And then there's different models. Of course, the one-on-one is appropriate for many people, but in other cases, I think the group model is much better. It's more economic. It'll be cheaper, and I think arguably for something like depression, the antidote to depression is connection, and having the mutual support of people that you're preparing together, you're go through the experience together, and then you're integrating together. I think that's really crucial and important. And then the other thing about this regulated program is that there'll be data, with appropriate privacy protections and making everything anonymous, but gathering data on outcomes, like, okay, this person was suffering from end of life anxiety or alcoholism or cluster headaches even, and then if we can show statistically this is a cost-effective intervention for these conditions with all this real world data, then we can go to Medicaid, Medicare, private insurers, and start getting insurance to cover. So yeah.
So let's imagine, sometime next year, I come up to Oregon and I go to a psilocybin service center. And by the way, I think United Airlines is getting ready for this, because I flew yesterday and the cover of the airline magazine was 3 perfect days in Portland. So I think they're getting ready for psychedelic tourism. But
oh, wow, yeah.
So if I come to Oregon once this is up and running, what's going to happen? I go to one of these service centers. I guess I do some kind of an intake orientation process. What happens from there? I just have a bunch of questions, like who decides how much I get? What will be known about my tolerance, or how I perhaps uniquely metabolize psilocybin? And what will be known about the potency of the mushrooms that I'm going to get? And for that matter, what form will the dosage be in? So the bunch of questions there. I can go back over those if you want, but
yeah, no, I got most of them, and I'm not able maybe to answer each of them in detail, but I think in general the training program, that are like they definitely have to train facilitators in appropriate dosing, and and then I think that for sure there's standard doses. I think it might be 3.5 milligrams or something, but maybe it's increments. Maybe there's like one. I don't know what it is. I actually really don't know exactly, but I do know those standardized. You'll know exactly how much you're getting. And your facilitator should be able to talk you through, okay, a light dose, medium dose, like a bigger dose, like the pros and cons of either, against your situation. And
I would be accompanied, so when I start tripping, I'm accompanied throughout that process. I do it at the center. How does that work?
Yeah, at the center, or I believe the grounds of the center. I think you could be outdoors if that, have an outdoor ceremony potentially. But yeah, it's somewhere within the property of the center, and your facilitator would need to be present and holding space in a energetically, safe and reassuring way, and that's just really helpful for people, because it's medicine's a lot, and just not having to worry about distracting whatever, you just don't have to worry about the whatever random noise, all the kind of things that can interfere with fully releasing into the experience. And yeah, and then that facilitator's there at the end, and then for whatever initial integration may be appropriate, but then having a separate follow-up scheduled in the days after to process the experience. And then ideally, I mean, that's all that the law mandates, but ideally there, be for especially people who really do need it, are in an ongoing therapeutic relationship, either with the facilitator themselves, or is just like, everyone's communicating with each other and their therapists and communicators. So, and then, ongoing integration and processing can go on, and integration circles, that kind of thing. So I assume like each of the treatment centers will probably have like integration circles of like people who go through it, and then who get to kind of just, as they want and need, can sit on like a once a month or whatever, kind of integration circle, and help process each other's, stuff. And yeah.
And you mentioned, sort of research being done. How is that going to, do you have a sense of how that's going to work? Like, are people going to be registered into, based on their condition, and do they have to, will kind of everyone be tracked as far as they're anonymized, but tracked as far as their, what their experience is, or how will that work?
I'm not actually sure, because obviously there would need to be follow-up and, an interview to ascertain, like what degree of abstinence in the case of alcohol, like what degree of, obviously there would need to be something like that. And I do believe OHSU, or, one of the prominent universities, is engaging on data collection, but I don't know exactly what's all involved. Yeah. And I'm, presumably people can opt out and not, have to participate if they don't want to. But the idea is to ideally, get a whole bunch of real world data showing that this is an effective protocol for a number of conditions.
So, at the same, you sort of referred to this earlier, but at the same time that Oregon is doing this experiment of sort of semi-legalizing psilocybin, clinical trials are underway in lots of different areas, and there's over 100 clinical trials currently listed in the government database clinicaltrials.gov for psilocybin. So, in those trials, patients are monitored closely. The outcomes and the impact on patients' illnesses and symptoms are documented. Side effects are tracked. And that's kind of the standard scientific process for the development of pharmaceuticals. Why do you think the way that you're going in Oregon is better than that, or do you think the two are essentially synergistic?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's pro and cons to every model. I think FDA approval route is generating that like super rigorous and robust science that's really helping shift the culture generally to enable a program like Oregon's to happen politically. I think insurance is much more straightforward under that medical pharma frame. So, at least for the qualifying conditions, it's a little more novel. With the Oregon's program, so it's a little, it's not as straightforward to get to coverage. Although the hope is we'll get there. And then Oregon's model is really not so much about. I mean, obviously, we do want to treat people with acute conditions, but is really also about personal growth, and that these are safe medicines that have been used for thousands of years, and so long as they're approached with respect and care, they have a pretty robust safety profile, and can be just very helpful for people. Just with the even if we're not clinically diagnosed, we're all struggling in life, and just be real helpful tools of personal growth and transformation. And so, that's just not going to happen in the FDA pharma. It's not, you can't go to your doctor and say, well, I don't have depression, but I think this could be really helpful for me. Like that's just not going to ever happen in that route. But Oregon's model is, all about, centering like, hey, any adult that can safely benefit should be able to do so.
And what about so you mentioned insurance coverage. It seems to me it's going to be very challenging to get insurance to cover anything that's not based on a diagnosis. That's the whole way the insurance model works, is, you have to be diagnosed with something and then you get treated for it. So, there are problems with that model, but that's how insurance works. So I'm wondering, first of all, what will it cost? If I come to Oregon to do this, what will I have to pay? Is that clear yet, or is that unclear? And if I don't have a specific diagnosis and I go to a service center and get a psilocybin treatment and therapy, how could I seek insurance benefits for that?
Well, the short answer right now is like there is no insurance option.
Right.
This is a process, and you've enumerated some of the challenges. I think in the hopefully in a not too distant future, some third party physician, you'd have, let's say you're suffering from alcoholism, or you're just that's and you've got a diagnosis as such, and your physician says, well, I think one of these facilitated psilocybin sessions could be helpful. Ideally, that would qualify. Now, of course, psilocybin is actually going through FDA approval for alcoholism, so that might not be the best case, but maybe there's something like that's not going to, whatever condition, like, I don't know, maybe it turns out that people are suffering from cluster headaches, for example, and there's no active how do you say FDA clinical studies being done on that, but there is anecdotal evidence, or actually some clinical evidence that LSD actually does really help with cluster headaches. And so and I think psilocybin may be able to help. So if you have like a it's like conclusive or compelling evidence that a certain condition can be helped, and you've got a formal diagnosis, I mean, the hope is at some point we can get that covered, but near term, that's not happening. And as far as the costs go, I mean, I would say like probably $1,000 minimum for a one-on-one, if not more, to do the initial screening session, the all-day facilitated session, and then your integration session for a one-on-one. But once you get into the group models, I think that's where it can drop, and I would say like hopefully like $500 or something. You can get down more in that range, or even lower once you can have like like say 8 people go through, or in a group with 2 facilitators or something like that. Yeah.
I see. And is there some thought being given, or are there plans being developed to, sort of from an equity perspective, to make these therapies accessible to people who don't have, $1,000 to spend, and how is that going to work?
Yeah, so I'm on the board of the Sheree Eckert Foundation, and Sheree Eckert was the wife of Tom Eckert, and so Tom and Sheree were the visionary and a therapist couple behind this program. And so Sheree, very much that was on her mind, and definitely wanted to make sure that we had a foundation and philanthropic support to help sponsor people who couldn't otherwise afford treatment. And then also to train facilitators who wouldn't otherwise be able to pay the training costs of becoming a licensed facilitator, and making sure that we have a good cohort of BIPOC and LGBTQ facilitators, so everyone coming from these communities feels like there's somebody that can understand where they're coming from, and they have that culturally informed care model.
Mm-hmm.
We're big fans of the Alma Institute. So Alma Institute is in particular focused on BIPOC and LGBTQ, and has a scholarship fund separate from Sheree Eckert Foundation to subsidize the costs of people who wouldn't otherwise be able to qualify. So, I mean, I think private philanthropic money can do a lot here, but I mean, the hope is eventually we can get, public and private insurers to start covering. But yeah, for at least the next couple of years, it's really incumbent on private philanthropy to help make it accessible for people who otherwise can't access.
So, I mean, is it your hope that at some point, for example, Oregon Medicaid would cover psilocybin therapy?
Yeah, that's absolutely the hope. I mean, the other thing that we're optimistic about is I'm involved with the Plant Medicine Healing Alliance, and we have a goal of, I mean, the goal was to via City Council approve decriminalization of psilocybin mushrooms and ayahuasca and other plant medicines, and allow for home grow and community healing in churches and all that kind of thing, which are, the most economical of all. So the city council process has turned out to be pretty difficult. So it looks like we'll be running a ballot measure there in 24, and that will, I mean, measure 110 is great, but the limits on, like, say, mushrooms, it's like, I don't know, 12 ounces or something. And
So just explain that a little bit more. What does 110 do?
oh, so measure 110 decriminalizes all drugs, like heroin, methamphetamine, psilocybin, LSD, everything is decriminalized to some amount. And then they have specified limits. So if you're underneath that, you're fine. It basically says, like, arresting people is not the way to do it. So, but those thresholds for plant medicines are like rather low and don't really allow for home growing and cultivation and community healing. And like, if you're a facilitator wanting to facilitate a mushroom ceremony or at a church, I mean, it's like under 110, no one person can have that quantity. Everyone could bring that that personal amounts, so 110 does enable that. I mean, you can, like, all have, wherever you get it, like, bring it and kind of sit together and heal. But we want to make it so that it's fine for, like, say, a church or community healing circle to form and say, okay, well, we got like 20 members and we sit together once a month or whatever, and we each take 6 grams, whatever, and then we need 6 months, and so then you have like and you basically have the law says, like, that's fine, like, and you can be above board and you can be advertising, and so I think that's really important to have, because it is the most accessible, for people who are struggling more acutely, and should be like matched maybe someone with more kind of therapeutic training. I mean, I think the models ultimately will be complementary, that there are people who are not ready to sit in circle. I mean, they're suffering, like, real deep trauma, or just some real stuff, and they need one-on-one, with someone who's like more highly trained. And that's where the regulated program is, really shines. But then, like, what do you do? Like, what you have that experience. I mean, and now it's to say you're ready to sit in circle and be in a community. Like, we need to have that law say that that's okay. And then you have that ongoing support, like ongoing integration support. And, in some ways, I think it's misleading in the culture. We have this kind of idea from the clinical trials that, you just need psilocybin mushrooms one time and the rest of your life is going to be, a happy, awesome thing. And it's like, yeah, I mean, obviously can give you a huge break and some real insight and stuff. But, the reality is, like, life's hard, and medicine, you look at indigenous cultures, it's not like you drink medicine one time in your whole life. It's a routine practice. You're, just kind of checking in. The medicine is just helping you, once a month, once a quarter, whatever the rhythm. And so I think ultimately that's like where the culture needs to go, and making sure we have the legal, permission and context within which that can flourish. Yeah.
Okay. I'm going to pause just for a moment here for a word from our sponsor, which in this case is MindSite News. And we're the only dedicated journalism site in the country that is dedicated solely to reporting on mental health. We're nonprofit, and we depend on our readers and supporters to keep us going. And you can support us by going to our website, mindsitenews.org, and clicking on the donate button at the top of the page. Doing so will help us build our capacity to keep covering this issue, to do in-depth reporting on psychedelics and their role as a mental health therapy, and all the other coverage we're doing of mental health issues. You can also sign up there for our daily newsletter, MindSite News Daily. So David, as you think about all this, and it's coming very soon, as we've discussed, what keeps you up at night? What are your worries, if you have them, and I assume you must, about how this whole thing is going to play out?
Yeah, I mean, I think I think the worries are that there's this a huge pent-up need in Oregon, and there's a real bottleneck of getting the facilitators and enough of them trained up, and maybe there's a lot of expectation about just how many people are going to be able to access this program, and really, if we need to, it's going to take, I think, years really to train up enough facilitators to really meet the need that's out there and start making a real difference on a population level kind of scale. It's not like in January, boom, 6 months later, Oregon's healed and over their mental health crisis. I mean, it's and so I think the expectations need to be a little tempered, and it's just going to take a while, I think, for just the number of facilitators to be licensed, and accessibility, making sure that this isn't just a program for the wealthy and affluent. I think that's crucial, and making sure that people who would not otherwise be able to access the program are able to do so.
Okay. I think we have some questions coming in from our audience. So Tiffany, if you want to come back on and share some of those questions, that would be great.
All right, thanks, Rob. So David, I have a question for you personally, just with listening to your conversation. Kind of, if you were to imagine yourself coming from a lens of not being within like a plant medicine community, there is this stigma that comes with kind of the idea of working with psilocybin, and you had referred to the war on drugs. And, listening to some of the things that you said, I love that you bring up this aspect of integration, and how there's a historical context to substance like a plant medicine, like a psilocybin. And there are cultures that use it with reverence and as a sacrament, and also as a healing modality. And so when we think about kind of the wording that we're using as we are starting to share like these cultures that actually come from different worldviews sometimes, do you think that like a reference of like a session as a trip is fair? And then also, if you can comment on that, and also talk about the difference of kind of like this Western idea of seeking a cure versus this idea of healing, and how integration, or like what is integration? Like, how would you explain that to people? Like, where would it be different than the current models of treatment?
Yeah, right on. Well, and remind me if I forget one of your questions in there, and I thought they were a great set of questions. So just the word trip is, I think probably not the best term for a lot of what we're talking about, healing journey. Maybe better, going on a healing journey. I mean, trip is interesting. I mean, just when you're traveling abroad and you're out of your normal environment and world that we just take for granted, like the magical miracle of existence that's around us, we just get used to, well, that tree's there, and this is over there, and you just stop marveling at just how mysteriously awesome it all is. And when you travel on your trip, that's that experience of like, holy moly, like it's all like new, the whole world's new. And so, and it's, so in that regard, I think it's a good kind of metaphor, that we talk about a psychedelic experience being a trip, because it in a way does break that mode of consciousness, that take it for granted, like been there, done that, like, just kind of breaking out of that thinking or whatever, categorization, and just making you present to the world and the magical mystery of it. So I think it's cool in that kind of general sense, but for people who are like suffering more acutely, and they're going to go in and do some really hard work, and it's true for a lot of us, and it's not a fun trip, it's just like, you're going to do some hard work and confront some difficult things. And so I think healing journey probably maybe is better. And yeah, as far as, yeah, like, I was kind of like alluding to that, I think in some, that, a single session can, sometimes resolve something very acute, but generally speaking, I think it's more of an ongoing, that, the idea that you have this kind of one and done, like you're all healed up for the rest of your life, is not really that accurate, and that the indigenous traditions don't look at it like that. It's just part of your path in your life and helping you lead a better life, as well as for the community and collective. And yeah, and what else was, you had some good other, oh yeah, integration. Yeah, I mean, whatever insights we get, we need to honor and integrate into our lives, or it's like a waste. And, like we need to do the work outside of the medicine space to integrate, what we've learned, and do the work. And, like maybe it's like, generally speaking, good diet, fitness, getting in nature, journaling, and just enabling, just going deeper and allowing the insights to really kind of, how do you say, take hold and integrate, and actually help shift your behavior, and things that maybe aren't that helpful, and shift to a new kind of way of maybe rolling in life. And some people, especially if it's like a very intense journey, like it's like like psychedelics without integration is like heart surgery without anesthesia, or heard that model. I think it's a little intense, but the idea, like especially for a very big psychedelic experience, if you're not really spending real time like integrating it and processing it, then yeah, that's not ideal, and can be very destabilizing. Yeah, so I think it's important to really do that integration work, so you can take especially really big experiences. And I'll just take an example of my life, the experience in my recent blog. I just came out as he, they in coming out day on October 11th, and talk about a huge experience in Amsterdam, in a gay trans club on LSD and MDMA, and dying 5 different ways into the love and light at the heart of existence, and just working through a lot of stuff. But it was such a huge experience, and it was so big. I was like borderline schizophrenic for like 6 months. I had a like full classic spiritual emergency in this Stanislav Grof sense of things, and no interpretive context whatsoever. But I was journaling and reading Stanislav Grof and Tibetan Book of Living and Dying, and just getting these interpretive contexts, and Jungian, various Jungian thinkers were really helpful. But rewinding the tape, it would have been really great if I had like a more formal integration group that like really it's like, what the hell has happened? Just be able to talk through and process your experience, and get into like that, yeah, conscious relationship.
Great.
Great.
Did you have some more audience questions, Tiffany?
We do have an audience question. But I have one more question to ask in reference to a New York Times article. So in 2021, there was a letter to the editor of the New York Times in response to a May 2021 article titled "Psychedelics Are Poised to Reshape Psychiatry." And it was written by Dr. Jeffrey Lieberman, who's the chair of psychiatry at Columbia University, and Dr. Sabet, who was a fellow at Yale University. And they have a quote, and the letter to the editor was about how psychedelics should slow down. And they said that the people advocating access and promoting the studies of psychedelic drugs, patients, therapists, companies, and investors, are usually enthusiasts motivated by positive personal experiences using these substances. While understandable, this bias supplants the dispassionate, objective mindset that serious scientific research requires. And so I'm just wanted to give you the opportunity to respond to a statement like that. I know that you're on the board of MAPS and you're involved in many other organizations. And so, like, what would you say to counter this idea that, there's this overzealousness with moving things to market and it needs to slow down?
Yeah, I think that's Kevin Sabet. So he's a long time kind of anti-cannabis dude as well. And a lot of the same arguments were made against cannabis. Unfortunately, both cannabis and psychedelics were just relegated into this intense stigma. So like proper clinical trials weren't done for 70 years. But since those clinical trials have restarted, it's just been amazing. And just we have FDA breakthrough designation for psilocybin, and then just totally independent of that FDA approval route in clinical science, we have thousands of years of indigenous use, and then just obviously a huge amount in the American underground. And I think that that the safety of these substances, as far as physical safety, is well established. No one's dying, or there's like no lethal dose. Think that the clinical studies are pretty compelling that have been done, and obviously we got to, it'll be great for FDA to finish the approval process for the phase 3 trials underway for depression and for alcoholism. But in the meantime, I think like our veteran community in particular, who's a huge champion, obviously, for the movement and really helping make this be a bipartisan issue. They're having to travel overseas to get healed. They basically fought for this country, but are criminals if they access this healing on American soil, and are desperate and are taking their lives at 22 veterans a day are committing suicide. And we have the answer, and it's not maybe every single person is going to be saved, but a lot of them. And they're just like, oh, we got to wait for this whatever process that Kevin Sabet thinks needs to happen. It's like, no, man, like we know these medicines are safe, and you just you approach them with care and respect. And we have thousands of years of ancestral knowledge already, and now we have a couple of decades of clinical research, and so the time's now. And
but is there also a danger that the medicines are safe, but sort of having it be less having the use be popularized, large numbers of people using, hopefully with guides, hopefully with this kind of therapeutic process. But when the whole thing opens up, is there a danger that there will be setbacks, and that would essentially push back or set, damage the potential therapeutic use because of, sort of a backlash?
For the, yeah, and that for sure. So that the concern there is that the decriminalizing the medicines outside of the therapeutic context and allowing people to, you know, grow their own and take them out of nature or at a concert or, you know, however people want to do, in more uncontrolled environments where, you know, things can go sideways much more easily than in a more controlled therapeutic context. Yeah, I mean, I definitely, there's a risk of that happening, but I think by and large, like as the culture gets educated, as we remove the stigma and real education flows, like, you know, look, this is, you know, setting is really important. You know, it's probably not a good idea to take mushrooms and, you know, go to the mall or watch TV, you know, like, you know, just as like some basic information, like starts to really flow and permeate. And, you know, and I think the test there of like Denver and Oakland and all the cities that have decriminalized, DC, Seattle, you know, we're not seeing, you know, the sky's not falling where this is happening. And I think that, you know, that it is important to decriminalize the medicines outside of the therapeutic context. And there's real accessibility issues as well involved with that. So yeah, I mean, I understand the concern, and for sure you're going to have some proportion of negative outcomes in the, you know, an uncontrolled context versus the more controlled therapeutic context. But I think that the calculus still weighs in favor of accessibility and decriminalization and this education and getting people to like an indigenous tribe that's, you know, where the entheogens are, you know, permeate life, and everybody just understands how to be in relationship and what is and what isn't cool. And so I think, you know, we're early as a society and learning, but that we will learn. Yeah.
Great.
All right, so last question that we have from our audience is what role do you think media and or journalism can and or should play in shaping the future of psychedelics and the rollout of a new policy? Do you think that culture change is inextricably linked to media?
Yeah. I mean, I think, you know, the way media reports on issues is obviously crucial to shaping public opinion. And, you know, we saw like, you know, back in the day when, you know, the establishment authorities were freaked out by the counterculture and the civil rights movement and basically weaponized drugs to go after people of color and activists. And the way that, you know, media just completely ate that up. And, you know, it's just like, you know, almost a state control, you know, the model of like what is it? Noam Chomsky's got his book, Thought Control in a Democratic Society. And yeah, like we tend to think that, like, oh, you know, in a totalitarian society where the media is just widely understood to be a puppet of the authorities and you know, spouting whatever it is they want you to hear. And nonetheless, very effective. And in a democratic society, you know, we like to think like we have complete independence of our media institutions, but all too often they will, you know, just basically parrot the party line and augment it and play that crucial role to shaping public discourse and public opinion. And, you know, and just the stigma we're fighting right now around psychedelics and all the things like, you know, LSD, you know, breaks your chromosomes, and after 7 hits, you're legally insane. And, you know, just all that. I mean, luckily that's starting to dissipate now. And, you know, we are well into the Renaissance, and Michael Pollan's book and documentary and, you know, all the media now that is countering that false narrative and putting out a more accurate narrative. But that is crucial. I mean, it's just like, we're not going to correct that false narrative without the media issuing a more accurate narrative. And so I think, yeah, you know, media is just like the inevitable like medium where this kind of shift in public opinion, or how it shifts and how that education goes down.
Great. Well, David, thank you so much. I see we're kind of running up to the hour here, so we could talk for a lot longer, but really thank you for joining us. Thanks to our audience. I want to mention that next week on October 20th, same time, same station, we'll be talking to Simran Sethi, a journalist and founder of the Asian Psychedelic Collective. We'll talk about racial and ethnic disparities in mental health, her interest in psychedelics, and hear about her experience as a member of the Fireside Project, which is a nonprofit psychedelic peer support line. So please register to join us then. Don't forget to sign up for our newsletter. And if the spirit moves you, to make a donation to MindSite News. And thanks again to David Bronner, the Cosmic Engagement Officer for Dr. Bronner's Magic Soaps and the psychedelic activist.
Yeah, right on. Well, thank you both for having me. Yeah, this was awesome.
Great. Thanks so much. Take care.
Yeah, take care. Yeah.
Bye-bye.